Dust devils danced across the parched earth, mirroring the turmoil in Jedediah's soul. They whipped around the small, weathered ranch house, a lonely sentinel against the vast expanse of the unforgiving landscape. Jed, a man etched with the harsh lines of the West and bearing a scar that bisected his left cheek like a jagged lightning bolt, watched them from the porch, his gaze distant and haunted. He was a creature of habit, a man who found solace in the predictable rhythm of ranch life. Sunrise, tending to the cattle, mending fences, sunset. Each day a carbon copy of the last, a deliberate attempt to numb the pain that still throbbed beneath the surface. His ranch, a modest spread carved out of the unforgiving terrain, was a reflection of his own wounded spirit. Fences sagged, paint peeled from the wood, and the garden lay barren, mirroring the emptiness within him. It wasn't that he couldn't fix things up, he simply lacked the motivation. What was the point of creating something beautiful when everything he had ever loved had been taken away? 10 years ago, Sarah, the woman he had planned to marry, had been killed in a stagecoach robbery gone wrong. The bullet meant for him had struck her instead, leaving him with a permanent scar and a heart shattered beyond repair. He had sworn off love then, vowing to never again subject himself to such devastating vulnerability. The scar on his face was a constant reminder of that vow, a physical manifestation of the emotional barrier he had erected around his heart. He was content, or so he told himself, to live out his days alone, a solitary figure against the backdrop of the majestic, yet unforgiving West. He found a certain grim satisfaction in his self-imposed isolation, a perverse sense of control in a world that had taken everything from him. He preferred the company of his cattle to that of people, finding a quiet understanding in their bovine eyes that he could never find in human interaction. The stagecoach robbery that claimed Sarah's life played out in Jed's mind like a broken record. He'd been young, full of hope, ready to build a life with the woman he adored. Sarah, with her sunshine smile and a spirit as bright as the desert sky, had been his everything. They were returning from town, giddy with excitement after purchasing the wedding rings. The bandits, masked and ruthless, had ambushed the stagecoach, their demands echoing through the canyon. Jed remembered the metallic tang of fear, the frantic shouts, and then the deafening roar of gunfire. He had lunged to protect Sarah, but it was too late. The bullet, meant for him, pierced her heart. He held her as she took her last breath, her blood staining his hands, the warmth of her life fading into the cold reality of death. The scar wasn't just on his face, it was etched onto his soul. He carried the weight of Sarah's death every single day, a constant reminder of his failure to protect her. The guilt gnawed at him, whispering insidious doubts in the dead of night. He often wondered if he could have done something differently, if he could have somehow changed the outcome. After Sarah's death, Jed had become a recluse, pushing away anyone who tried to get close. He couldn't bear the thought of experiencing that kind of loss again. He built walls around his heart, brick by painful brick, until he was completely isolated. He threw himself into his work, finding a temporary escape in the physical labor of ranching. But the silence of the ranch only amplified the emptiness within him. He was a ghost haunting his own life, forever trapped in the past. The sunsets, once a source of joy, now only reminded him of the sunsets he would never share with Sarah. Every happy couple he saw was a painful reminder of what he had lost. His world had become a monochrome landscape, devoid of color and joy. The wind, which had been a low, mournful sigh all day, began to howl. The sky, once a brilliant blue, was now a swirling mass of angry gray clouds. Lightning flashed, illuminating the landscape in stark, fleeting glimpses. Thunder rumbled in the distance, growing closer with each passing moment. The storm was coming, a violent tempest that mirrored the storm raging within Jed's heart. He could feel the electricity in the air, a tangible sense of impending chaos. The horses in the corral grew restless, their hooves drumming against the dry earth. Even the cattle seemed to sense the change, huddling together for comfort. Jed knew he should probably secure the barn and bring the animals inside, but he found himself strangely paralyzed, drawn to the raw power of the approaching storm. He stood on the porch, watching as the first fat raindrops began to fall, splattering against the parched ground. The wind picked up, whipping his hair around his face and stinging his eyes. He felt a strange sense of anticipation, as if the storm was a harbinger of something significant, something that would disrupt the monotonous rhythm of his life. The storm intensified, unleashing its full fury upon the land. The rain fell in sheets, blurring the landscape into an indistinguishable gray. The wind howled like a banshee, tearing at the trees and rattling the windows of the ranch house. Jed remained on the porch, oblivious to the discomfort, lost in his thoughts. He felt a strange kinship with the storm, a sense of shared turmoil. The storm was a cleansing force, washing away the dust and debris of the old, making way for something new. Or so he hoped. Maybe, just maybe, this storm would wash away the pain and the guilt that had been clinging to him for so long. A sudden, sharp rap at the door cut through the howling wind. Jed, startled, hesitated. He hadn't had a visitor in months, and certainly not in weather like this. He peered through the grimy window, but the rain obscured his view. Another insistent knock, louder this time, forced him into action. He grabbed his rifle, a reflex born of years spent in the unforgiving West, and cautiously approached the door. He braced himself, his hand on the latch, and swung the door open. The wind immediately ripped through the small house, scattering dust and papers. Standing on the porch, soaked to the bone and shivering uncontrollably, was a young woman. She was wearing a wedding dress, now muddied and torn, and her face was streaked with tears. Her eyes, wide and filled with a desperate plea, locked onto his. "Please," she gasped, her voice barely audible above the roar of the storm. "Please help me. I don't remember who I am." Jed stared at her, dumbfounded. A bride, in the middle of nowhere, with no memory? It was like something out of a dime novel. He lowered his rifle slightly, but remained wary. This could be a trap, a ruse. But the genuine fear in her eyes, the vulnerability in her posture, gave him pause. He studied her face, searching for any sign of deception. She looked young, barely more than a girl. Her dress, despite being ruined, was clearly expensive, suggesting she came from a wealthy family. What was she doing out here, alone and lost? He hesitated for a moment longer, torn between his ingrained distrust and a flicker of compassion. The storm raged on, a relentless reminder of her precarious situation. Finally, he made a decision. "Get inside," he said gruffly, stepping aside to let her pass. "And try not to drip all over the floor." Jed watched as the woman, shivering and clutching her arms around herself, stepped inside. The warmth of the fire in the hearth seemed to offer her some small comfort. He closed the door against the raging storm, the sound of the wind momentarily muted. He leaned the rifle against the wall, but kept a watchful eye on her. "There should be some blankets in the chest over there," he said, gesturing towards a weathered wooden chest in the corner of the room. "Get yourself wrapped up. You'll catch your death of cold." He busied himself with stoking the fire, trying to ignore the unsettling feeling that had taken root in his gut. He was a simple man, a man of the land, not a caretaker for lost brides with amnesia. He wanted her gone, wanted his life back to normal, but he couldn't just throw her out into the storm. The woman, still dripping wet, rummaged through the chest and pulled out a thick woolen blanket. She wrapped it around herself, her shivering subsiding slightly. She looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't opened the door." Jed grunted in response, avoiding her gaze. "Don't mention it. Just try to get some rest. We'll figure things out in the morning." He knew he should probably ask her some questions, try to glean some information about who she was and where she came from, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. He was afraid of what he might find out, afraid of getting involved. He just wanted her to disappear as quickly as she had arrived, leaving him to his solitary existence. But deep down, he knew that things would never be the same again. The storm had brought more than just rain. It had brought a change, a disruption to the carefully constructed walls he had built around his heart. The fire crackled merrily, casting dancing shadows on the walls of the small cabin. Jed glanced at the woman huddled by the hearth, still wrapped in the blanket. Her wet wedding dress lay discarded on the floor, a stark reminder of her strange predicament. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was making a mistake, that letting her into his life would only bring trouble. But he couldn't deny the pull of his conscience, the ingrained sense of duty that had been instilled in him since childhood. He had been raised to help those in need, to offer shelter to the weary traveler, to lend a hand to those less fortunate. His father, a stern but fair man, had always emphasized the importance of doing the right thing, even when it was difficult. And despite his years of self-imposed isolation, those lessons still resonated within him. He rummaged through his meager supplies and found a clean, albeit worn, nightgown. He hesitated for a moment, then walked over to her and offered it. "Here," he said, his voice gruff. "This is Sarah's. It was Sarah's. It's clean. You can change into it." He immediately regretted the mention of Sarah's name. The woman looked at him, her eyes filled with a question he couldn't answer. He turned away, busying himself with preparing a pot of coffee. He could feel her gaze on him, but he refused to meet her eyes. As the coffee brewed, filling the cabin with its rich aroma, Jed couldn't help but steal glances at her. She was younger than he had initially thought, with delicate features and a vulnerability that tugged at his heartstrings. He tried to remind himself of his vow, of the pain and loss that awaited anyone who dared to open their heart to love. But the woman's presence, her quiet gratitude, was slowly chipping away at the walls he had so carefully constructed. She changed into the nightgown behind a makeshift screen fashioned from a blanket draped over a rope. Jed kept his back turned, staring into the fire, the flames reflecting in his dark eyes. He tried to focus on the warmth, on the familiar scent of wood smoke, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the woman in his cabin. When she emerged, she looked smaller, more vulnerable in the oversized nightgown. She sat back down by the fire, her bare feet tucked beneath her. Jed poured her a cup of coffee, handing it to her without a word. He watched as she took a tentative sip, her eyes closing in momentary contentment. "It's good," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you." Jed simply nodded, taking a seat across from her. He observed her carefully, noticing the fine lines around her eyes, the delicate curve of her jaw, the way her hands trembled slightly as she held the cup. He tried to maintain his detachment, to see her as a problem to be solved, not a person to be cared for. But it was becoming increasingly difficult. He noticed the way she kept touching her head, as if trying to unlock a forgotten memory. Her brow furrowed in concentration, and a pained expression crossed her face. Do you remember anything?" he finally asked, unable to contain his curiosity any longer. She shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "Nothing," she whispered. "It's like my mind is a blank slate. I don't know who I am, where I came from, or why I was wearing that dress." Her voice cracked with emotion, and Jed felt a pang of sympathy. He knew what it was like to lose everything, to be adrift in a sea of uncertainty. He just didn't know if he had the strength to help her find her way back. "We need to call you something," Jed said, breaking the silence. "Can't keep calling you the bride." He thought for a moment. "How about Hope? Seems fitting, considering." Hope nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. "Hope," she repeated softly. "I like it. It feels right." As the days passed, Hope settled into a routine of sorts on the ranch. The storm had subsided, leaving behind a landscape washed clean and smelling of fresh earth. But inside Hope's mind, the storm continued to rage. She would often experience sudden flashes of images, fragmented memories that were more confusing than enlightening. A grand house, a stern-faced man, a feeling of overwhelming dread. These were the pieces that floated to the surface, only to disappear again before she could grasp their meaning. She would wake up in the middle of the night, screaming from nightmares she couldn't recall. Jed, initially annoyed by the disruption, found himself drawn to her distress. He would sit with her, offering her a comforting presence until she calmed down. He never touched her, never spoke words of comfort, but his mere presence seemed to soothe her. Sometimes, while working in a garden, a patch of land she had started to cultivate with surprising enthusiasm, she would suddenly stop, her eyes glazed over, as if she were seeing something that wasn't there. She would clutch her head, groaning softly, before the episode passed, leaving her shaken and confused. Jed watched her struggles with a mixture of concern and apprehension. He knew that her memories held the key to her identity, to her past. But he also feared what those memories might reveal. What if she was running from something dangerous? What if her past was something she was better off forgetting? He was caught between his desire to help her and his fear of the consequences. He only knew that the longer she stayed, the harder it would be for him to let her go. Life on the ranch began to change, subtly at first, then more noticeably. Jed, initially reluctant to involve her, found himself grudgingly impressed by her willingness to tackle even the most unpleasant tasks. She learned to milk the cows, her small hands surprisingly adept at the task. She helped mend fences, her nimble fingers tying knots with surprising skill. She even learned to ride a horse, her initial fear quickly giving way to exhilaration. Jed found himself spending more time with her, teaching her the ropes, sharing stories of the land and its history. He noticed the way her eyes lit up when he spoke of Sarah, the way she listened with genuine interest. He found himself talking about Sarah more openly than he had in years, sharing memories he had long buried. He was surprised by her resilience, by her ability to find joy in the simple things, despite her amnesia. She brought a sense of lightness and hope to the ranch, chasing away the shadows that had lingered for so long. The neglected garden, once a symbol of his despair, now flourished under her care, bursting with color and life. He still fought against his growing feelings for her, reminding himself of his vow, of the pain that awaited him if he allowed himself to love again. But it was becoming increasingly difficult to resist her charm, her warmth, her unwavering optimism. She was slowly but surely breaking down the walls he had built around his heart, and he wasn't sure if he wanted her to stop. The silence of the ranch was now filled with laughter, and the emptiness within him began to recede, replaced by a flicker of hope he thought he had long lost. The sound of approaching horses broke the peaceful rhythm of the ranch. Jed, his hand instinctively reaching for his rifle, watched as a lone rider approached. It was Sheriff Brody, a familiar figure in these parts, a man known for his unwavering dedication to the law. Brody dismounted, his weathered face etched with concern. "Jed," he greeted, his voice grave. "I'm looking for a runaway bride. Name of? Eliza. She disappeared a few days ago, right before her wedding." He pulled out a faded photograph, and Jed's heart skipped a beat. It was Hope, her face younger, more innocent, but unmistakably her. He felt a surge of protectiveness, a fierce determination to shield her from whatever trouble she was running from. "Description fits," Brody continued, oblivious to Jed's internal turmoil. "About 20 years old, fair hair, blue eyes. Was last seen wearing a wedding dress." Jed's mind raced. He could lie, deny ever seeing her. But lying to the law was a dangerous game, one he wasn't sure he was willing to play. He glanced towards the garden, where Hope was tending to her flowers, unaware of the sheriff's presence. He was torn. His duty to the law, to upholding justice, clashed with his growing feelings for Hope, with his desire to protect her. He knew that turning her in was the right thing to do, but the thought of handing her over to whoever she was running from filled him with dread. "Haven't seen anyone fitting that description," Jed said, his voice carefully neutral. He met Brody's gaze, hoping his lie wouldn't be detected. "This is a pretty isolated place, Sheriff. Folks don't often wander out this far." Brody studied him for a moment, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. "You sure about that, Jed? This is a serious matter. This girl's family is worried sick." Jed hardened his gaze. "I'm sure, Sheriff. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got work to do." He turned and walked towards the barn, his heart pounding in his chest. He had bought Hope some time, but he knew that Brody wouldn't give up easily. He needed to decide what to do, and he needed to decide fast. Jed found Hope in the barn, brushing down one of the horses. He knew he couldn't keep the truth from her any longer. He had to tell her about Sheriff Brody, about Eliza, about the life she had forgotten. He took a deep breath and approached her. "Hope," he said, his voice gentle. "We need to talk." He explained everything, carefully choosing his words, trying to soften the blow. He told her about the sheriff's visit, about the photograph, about her real name, Eliza. Hope listened in stunned silence, her eyes widening with disbelief. When he finished, she sank to the ground, her face pale. "Eliza," she whispered. That doesn't sound like me." "It's your name," Jed said softly. "It's who you were before the storm." Hope shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "But I don't remember any of it. I don't remember being Eliza. I only remember being Hope." Jed knelt beside her, taking her hand in his. "I know," he said, "and I know this is hard, but we need to figure out what's going on. We need to find out why you ran away, why you lost your memory." He made a decision, then, a decision that would change everything. He couldn't just hand her over to the sheriff, not without knowing the truth. He had to help her uncover her past, to understand what she was running from. "I'm going to help you, Hope," he said, his voice firm. "We're going to find out who Eliza is and why she ran away. And then we'll decide what to do." Hope looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and gratitude. "You do that for me?" she asked. Jed nodded, his heart swelling with a protectiveness he had never felt before. "I would," he said. "Now let's start thinking. What's the last thing you remember? Any image, any feeling, anything at all?" He was committed. He was going to help Hope find herself, even if it meant risking everything. Hope strained, trying to grasp onto something, anything. A recurring image of a stained glass window, a specific shade of blue, kept surfacing, and a faint scent of lavender. They were flimsy threads, but it was all they had. Jed, ever practical, remembered seeing a similar stained glass window at the church in Redemption, a small town about a day's ride away. And lavender grew wild in the hills surrounding the town. It was a long shot, but it was worth a try. They packed light, Jed taking his rifle and a bedroll, Hope carrying a small bag containing Sarah's nightgown and a few personal items. They left before dawn, hoping to avoid running into Sheriff Brody. The ride to Redemption was long and arduous. Hope, still weak and recovering from her ordeal, struggled at times, but Jed was patient, offering her encouragement and support. He watched her closely, noticing the subtle changes in her demeanor as they drew closer to their destination. As they neared Redemption, Hope grew increasingly agitated, her fragmented memories intensifying. She described a feeling of oppression, of being trapped. She saw flashes of a large, imposing house and a man with cold, calculating eyes. When they finally reached Redemption, Hope gasped, her eyes widening in recognition. This feels familiar," she said, her voice trembling. The town was small and dusty, with a single main street lined with shops and saloons. The church, with its distinctive stained glass window, stood at the end of the street, a beacon of hope in the otherwise unremarkable landscape. They dismounted and walked towards the church, their hearts pounding with anticipation. Jed knew that they were getting closer to the truth, but he also knew that the truth could be dangerous. He just hoped they were prepared for what they were about to find. Their search for clues had led them to this town, and now they had to hope they could find the answers they were looking for. Inside the church, the stained glass window cast a kaleidoscope of colors across the worn wooden floor. Hope stood before it, mesmerized, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. But no memories flooded back, only a sense of profound sadness. Jed approached the town's elderly priest, Father Michael, hoping he might shed some light on Hope's identity. He cautiously showed the priest the photograph Sheriff Brody had carried, identifying her as Eliza. Father Michael's face clouded over with concern. "Eliza. Yes, I know her. Eliza Barton. A sweet girl, but—" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "She was betrothed to Silas Blackwood." The name hung in the air like a curse. Jed had heard of Silas Blackwood. He was a wealthy rancher, known for his ruthless business practices and his possessive nature. He controlled a vast swathe of land and wielded considerable power in the region. Silas is not a good man, Father Michael continued, lowering his voice. He's controlling, demanding. Eliza was terrified of him. She confided in me that she didn't want to marry him, but her father owed Silas a great deal of money. Hope, who had been listening intently, gasped. A flicker of memory, a glimpse of a stern-faced man, a feeling of overwhelming dread flashed through her mind. He scared me, she whispered, clutching her head. I remember fear. Jed's blood ran cold. He understood now. Hope hadn't just run away from a wedding. She had run away from a prison. She had risked everything to escape a life of misery and oppression. He couldn't let Silas Blackwood get his hands on her. He wouldn't. He knew he had to protect her. Silas Blackwood was dangerous, but so was Jedediah when pushed. He would protect Hope at all costs. The discovery has led to more questions than answers. They didn't have much time to process the information before the church doors burst open, and Silas Blackwood strode in, followed by 4 heavily armed men. He was a large man, his face florid and his eyes cold and menacing. He exuded an aura of power and intimidation. Eliza, he said, his voice a low growl. There you are. I've been looking all over for you. Hope recoiled in fear, instinctively moving closer to Jed. Jed stood his ground, his hand instinctively reaching for the pistol tucked into his waistband. She doesn't want to see you, Blackwood, Jed said, his voice calm but firm. Silas sneered. Stay out of this, cowboy. This is between me and my bride. She's not your bride, Jed retorted. She ran away. She doesn't want to marry you. She doesn't know what she wants, Silas said, his eyes narrowing. She's confused. She'll come to her senses once she's back home. He gestured to his men, who moved forward, their hands resting on their guns. Bring her to me. Stay back, Jed warned, drawing his pistol. I don't want any trouble, but I won't let you take her. A tense standoff ensued. Silas and his men faced off against Jed, with Hope caught in the middle, her face pale with terror. The silence was broken only by the creaking of the floorboards and the heavy breathing of the men. You're making a mistake, cowboy, Silas said, his voice dripping with menace. You don't want to get involved in this. I'm a powerful man. I can make your life very difficult. Jed met his gaze, his own eyes unwavering. I'm not afraid of you, Blackwood, and I won't let you bully her. She's free to make her own choices. He would not let Silas take her. He made a choice. He would fight. The confrontation was inevitable. Jed was ready. The scar on Jed's face throbbed, a painful reminder of his past failures. He had failed to protect Sarah, and the guilt had haunted him for years. But looking at Hope, at the fear in her eyes, he knew he couldn't fail again. He wouldn't let Silas Blackwood take her, not without a fight. He realized, with a jolt, that he was no longer just protecting a stranger. He was protecting someone he cared about, someone who had brought light and hope back into his life. He was willing to risk everything, even his own life, for her freedom and happiness. The memory of Sarah, once a source of pain and guilt, now fueled his determination. He knew that Sarah would have wanted him to help Hope to stand up to injustice. He was finally honoring her memory by fighting for someone else's happiness. He tightened his grip on his pistol, his eyes fixed on Silas Blackwood. He was outnumbered, outgunned, but he wasn't afraid. He had faced death before, and he wasn't afraid to face it again if it meant protecting Hope. He saw a flicker of doubt in Silas's eyes, a realization that Jed wasn't just some simple cowboy. He was a man with nothing to lose, a man driven by a powerful sense of purpose. This doesn't have to end this way, Blackwood, Jed said, his voice steady. Just walk away. Let her go. She doesn't want to be with you. Silas hesitated for a moment, his face contorted with rage. Then, with a snarl, he gave the order. Kill him, he barked. The church erupted in chaos. Guns blazed, bullets whizzed through the air, and the stained glass window shattered, sending shards of colored glass raining down on the floor. Jed knew he was in for the fight of his life, but he was ready. He would fight for Hope, for her freedom, for her right to choose her own destiny. Jed would not let history repeat itself. He was a changed man, The church was too small, too confined for a proper gunfight. Jed knew he had to get Hope out of there. He grabbed her hand and pulled her towards the back door, dodging bullets as they ran. They burst out into the bright sunlight, sprinting towards the edge of town. Silas's men were hot on their heels, firing wildly. Jed returned fire, slowing them down just enough to give them a head start. He knew the terrain well. He had spent years exploring these hills and canyons, hunting and tracking. He used his knowledge of the land to his advantage, leading Silas's men on a wild goose chase through the rugged terrain. He led them through narrow canyons, across rocky hillsides, and through dense thickets of trees. He set traps, using his knowledge of the local flora and fauna to his advantage. He knew how to use the environment to outsmart his pursuers. One by one, Silas's men fell victim to Jed's traps and ambushes. One tripped over a hidden wire, sending him tumbling down a steep embankment. Another was bitten by a rattlesnake that Jed had deliberately provoked. A third was caught in a snare, dangling helplessly from a tree. Silas, enraged by the loss of his men, pressed on, determined to capture Hope. He was relentless, driven by his possessiveness and his desire for revenge. He tracked Jed and Hope through the hills, his anger growing with each passing hour. He was determined to have Eliza as his bride. He wanted her to pay for embarrassing him. Silas would get his revenge. Jed was in Silas's way. The showdown was coming. Jed and Hope would have to prepare for the fight of their lives. They had to survive. They would have to rely on each other. As they ran, as they dodged bullets and scrambled over rocks, flashes of memory began to surface in Hope's mind. They weren't clear, coherent memories, but rather disjointed images, sensations, and emotions. She remembered Silas's controlling gaze, the way he would dictate her every move, her every thought. She remembered the coldness of his touch, the way he would grip her arm, leaving bruises that she had to hide. She remembered the grand house, not as a place of luxury and comfort, but as a gilded cage, a prison where she was trapped and suffocated. She remembered her father's desperation, his pleading eyes, his willingness to sacrifice her happiness to settle his debts. And she remembered the night she had decided to run. She had packed a small bag. The final confrontation took place on a rocky hilltop overlooking the town of Redemption. Jed, exhausted and wounded, faced Silas, who was equally battered but no less determined. Hope watched from behind a large boulder, her heart pounding with fear. They circled each other, like two wolves sizing up their prey. The air crackled with tension. Silas lunged, swinging a heavy club. Jed dodged the blow and fired his pistol, hitting Silas in the arm. Silas roared in pain and charged again, his eyes filled with rage. Jed was forced to engage in hand-to-hand combat, relying on his strength and his years of experience as a rancher. They wrestled on the ground, exchanging blows, each determined to overpower the other. Jed managed to disarm Silas, but in the process he was stabbed in the side with a small knife that Silas had concealed in his boot. Jed cried out in pain and staggered back, clutching his side. Silas lunged again, ready to deliver the final blow. But Hope, fueled by adrenaline and a desperate desire to protect Jed, grabbed a rock and hurled it at Silas's head. The rock struck Silas squarely, knocking him unconscious. He collapsed to the ground, defeated. Hope rushed to Jed's side, her eyes filled with concern. "Jed, you're hurt," she cried. She tore a strip of cloth from her dress and pressed it against his wound, trying to stop the bleeding. As she tended to him, her fingers brushed against his skin, and she felt a surge of emotion. She realized, with a clarity that surprised her, that she was in love with him. He was a good man, a brave man, a man who was willing to risk everything for her. Jed looked at her, his eyes filled with pain and gratitude. "You saved my life," he whispered. "You saved mine," she replied. The moment brought them closer than ever. They both realized their feelings for each other. They knew their lives would never be the same. They survived the showdown, but the fight wasn't over. As Jed recovered from his wounds, Sheriff Brody arrived in Redemption, alerted to the commotion. He questioned Jed and Hope, listening intently to their story. He knew Silas Blackwood's reputation. and he could see the fear in Hope's eyes. He also saw the love that bloomed between them. He made a decision. He wouldn't arrest Hope, wouldn't force her to return to a life of misery. He would let her choose her own destiny. Silas Blackwood will face justice for his crimes, Brody said, his voice firm. But you, Eliza, you're free to go. You're free to choose your own path. He looked at Hope, his eyes filled with understanding. Just know that if you ever need help, you can always count on me. With Silas Blackwood out of the picture, Hope was faced with a choice. She could return to her old life, to her family, to the world she had left behind. Or she could embrace a new life with Jed, a life of freedom and love on the ranch. The decision was easy. She had no desire to return to the gilded cage, to the oppressive atmosphere of her former existence. She had found happiness with Jed, a happiness she had never known before. I'm staying with Jed, she said, her voice filled with conviction. This is my home now. This is where I belong. Back on the ranch, things began to change. Hope, now embracing her new identity, threw herself into transforming the neglected ranch into a thriving homestead. She planted a large garden, filled with colorful flowers and vegetables. She tended to the animals with loving care. She brought life and laughter back to the desolate landscape. Jed, watching her, felt his heart swell with happiness. He had finally confronted his past trauma, finally allowed himself to love again. He realized that he wasn't responsible for Sarah's death, that he had done everything he could to protect her. He had carried the weight of that guilt for too long. He also realized that he was worthy of love, that he deserved to be happy. Hope had shown him that it was possible to overcome tragedy, to find joy even in the darkest of times. He started to repair the fences, to paint the house, to take pride in his surroundings. He worked alongside Hope, their hands brushing, their eyes meeting, their hearts intertwining. He still carried the scar on his face, a reminder of his past, but it no longer defined him. It was simply a part of his story, a testament to his resilience, his ability to overcome adversity. He had found happiness with Hope, a happiness he never thought possible. He had found love again, a love that was stronger, deeper, and more enduring than anything he had ever known. He was finally at peace. Jedediah was no longer haunted. He had found love again. He was free. Hope had given him a new life, a life full of love and happiness, a life he never thought he would have. They would spend their lives together on the ranch. They would be happy. They would face all challenges together, ringing with love and determination. Years passed. The ranch flourished under their combined care. The garden became a source of pride, providing them with food and beauty. The cattle thrived, their numbers steadily increasing. The house, once dilapidated and forlorn, was now a warm and inviting home, filled with laughter and love. Jed and Hope rebuilt their lives together, brick by brick, their love a testament to the power of second chances and overcoming adversity. They faced challenges as all couples do, but they always faced them together, their bond growing stronger with each passing year. The scar on Jed's face faded slightly, but it remained a reminder of the past, a symbol of the pain he had overcome. And Hope, though she never fully recovered her memories of her life as Eliza, embraced her new identity, her new life with Jed. They never forgot Sarah, honoring her memory by living a life filled with love and compassion. They often visited her grave, sharing stories and leaving flowers. They knew that Sarah would have wanted them to be happy, and they were. They had found solace in each other's arms, a refuge from the storms of life. They had rebuilt their lives, creating a haven of love and happiness in the heart of the unforgiving West. They had proven that even the most broken hearts can heal, that even the most desolate landscapes can bloom. Their love story was a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, love can find a way. Their love was a testament to the power of second chances. They rebuilt their lives. The end.